Picture a man whose hands are stained with a legacy of blood he never chose. A man who walks through the town square and watches as mothers pull their children away, as merchants turn their backs, as priests make a subtle sign of the cross to ward off the evil he represents. Yet, this same man is a servant of the law, an instrument of justice, the final terrible hand of the state. He is the one who purges the wicked, the one who brings order to a world teetering on the edge of chaos. He is both a monster and a necessity, a pariah and a pillar of society. His name is Frantz Schmidt, but to the people of the Holy Roman Empire he is known by another name, a title whispered with a mixture of fear and disgust, the executioner. His story is not just a chronicle of death. It is a terrifying journey into the heart of a paradox, a lifelong battle to reclaim a soul that society had already condemned at birth. Before we step onto the blood-soaked scaffold with him, if you find yourself drawn to the forgotten corners of history where morality is painted in shades of gray, consider subscribing for more stories that challenge the line between hero and villain. And let me know in the comments what part of the world you're watching from. It's a profound thought that we can explore these dark tales together, connected across centuries. What you are about to hear is not a simple biography. It is the story of a curse, a contagion of dishonor passed from a father to a son. Frantz Schmidt was not born evil. He was born into a cage. His father, Heinrich, had been a simple woodsman, a man whose life was dictated by the rhythm of the seasons and the swing of his axe. But in the Holy Roman Empire, the whims of the powerful could shatter a life in an instant. The Margrave of Brandenburg-Ansbach, a man of absolute authority, found himself in need of an executioner. The position was not one that men volunteered for. It was a sentence of social death. The Margrave, in an act of casual tyranny, simply pointed his finger at 3 men, Heinrich among them, and forced them to draw lots. Fate, in its infinite cruelty, chose Heinrich. It was not a job offer. It was a command, an enslavement. To refuse meant death or exile. To accept meant becoming something less than human in the eyes of the world. From that day forward, the Schmidt name was poison. The family, once a respected part of their small community, became untouchable. Neighbors who once shared bread with them now crossed the street to avoid their shadow. The guild that Heinrich had belonged to cast him out. The church, which preached forgiveness for all, held them at arm's length. An executioner and his family were ritually unclean. They could not baptize their children alongside others, could not share a pew, could not be buried in consecrated ground. They were living ghosts, visible only when the state required a life to be taken. This was the world Frantz was born into. A world where his father's touch was considered a source of contamination, where the coins he earned were seen as stained with the blood of the condemned. Imagine being that boy. While other children learned their father's trade, baking, masonry, carpentry, Frantz learned the geography of the human body, but not for healing. He learned the precise point on the neck where a sword could sever the spine in a single, clean stroke. He learned the mechanics of the breaking wheel, how to shatter a man's limbs in a specific order to inflict maximum pain while keeping the victim alive until the final blow. He learned the art of strangulation with a rope, the subtle pressure required to crush a windpipe. His father, a man who must have loved his son, was forced to be his tutor in this gruesome craft. Each lesson was a nail in the coffin of Frantz's future. There would be no apprenticeship in a respectable guild for him, no marriage to the daughter of a proud merchant. His path was a narrow, dark channel, leading to only one place, the scaffold. He was trapped by the blood in his veins, a prisoner of a fate sealed before he ever drew his first breath. He didn't choose this life. It was his inheritance, a suffocating mantle of shame passed down from a father who had also never had a choice. As Frantz grew into a young man, the reality of his situation must have settled upon him like a shroud. He saw the way people looked at him, not with the simple disdain reserved for a troublemaker, but with a deep, primal revulsion. He was the living embodiment of death itself. And so he made a decision born not of ambition, but of desperation. He would not just accept his fate, he would master it. If he was to be the bringer of death, he would be the most precise, the most efficient, the most dispassionate executioner the Empire had ever seen. He would transform the brutal, chaotic act of public killing into a cold, solemn ritual of justice. He trained under his father with a grim determination, committing to memory the intricate legal codes that dictated the specific punishment for every conceivable crime. He memorized the weight and balance of the executioner's sword, practicing for hours until the two-handed weapon felt like an extension of his own arms. He studied anatomy, not as a physician would to heal, but to know with absolute certainty how to kill. This was his rebellion, to take the source of his family's shame and turn it into a terrifying, undeniable form of expertise. In 1573, at just 19 years old, his apprenticeship of horror was complete. The city of Bamberg offered him his first official post. This was it. The moment the curse would truly take hold, the moment he would step out of his father's shadow and cast his own. On the morning of May the 1st, as the sun rose over the city, Frantz Schmidt walked toward the public square. He wasn't just a boy on his way to a new job. He was a condemned soul walking toward his destiny, ready to wield the sword for the first time, not knowing that this single act would be the first step in a career that would see him take 394 human lives, all in the name of the law. The air in the Bamberg Square feels thick, heavy with the collective breath of hundreds of onlookers. For them, this is a spectacle, a grisly form of entertainment, but also a stern lesson etched in blood. For the condemned thief, kneeling on the platform, his world has shrunk to the splintered wood beneath his knees and the muffled sound of a priest's final prayer. But for Frantz Schmidt, this moment is everything. The weight of the executioner's sword is not just in his hands, it is on his soul. It is the physical manifestation of his family's curse, and his only terrible path to redemption. He can feel the eyes of the city council upon him, judging his every move. A clean strike means competence, a future, a continuation of his contract. A botched swing, a moment of hesitation, means not just the prolonged agony of the condemned, but his own humiliation. It would confirm what everyone already believes, that he is nothing more than a clumsy butcher, a creature of base violence. His heart must be a frantic drum against his ribs. But on the outside, he is a statue of perfect calm. This is the first lesson his father taught him. The crowd must never see your fear. They must see only the unwavering certainty of the law. He raises the blade, the polished steel catching the morning sun, a blinding flash of light before the final darkness. He thinks of nothing but the geometry of the act, the arc, the angle, the precise point of impact. There is a collective gasp, a terrible silence that seems to stretch for an eternity, and then a single, fluid motion. The sword descends. It is perfect, clean. The sound is a sickening final thud. The thief's life is over in less than a heartbeat. Frantz Schmidt's life, the one he was always meant to live, has just begun. This act, repeated hundreds of times throughout his career, was never just a killing. It was a ritual, a piece of state theater where every detail was laden with symbolism. Public executions in the Holy Roman Empire were the ultimate demonstration of power. In a world without mass media, without a police force as we know it, the scaffold was the state's most powerful message. It was a sermon delivered with a sword instead of a cross. It declared, in the most brutal terms imaginable, that there was an order to the world, and that the forces of that order, the princes, the magistrates, the city councils, had the power of life and death. The body of the condemned became a text upon which the law was written for all to see. Their broken limbs, their severed heads, were a warning, a promise of what awaited anyone who dared to challenge the social fabric. And Frantz Schmidt was the high priest of this brutal ceremony. He was not an agent of chaos. He was the ultimate enforcer of order. His precision was not just a matter of personal pride. It was a reflection of the state's own legitimacy. A clean beheading symbolized a clean, decisive justice. The sword was his preferred instrument, the tool of his grim art. In his meticulous diary, a document that chills the blood with its detached professionalism, he would note simply, "beheaded with the sword." This was considered the most honorable form of death, a strange mercy in a merciless system. It was typically reserved for men of a certain social standing, a final acknowledgement of a status that even crime could not entirely erase. It was swift, and if done correctly, it allowed the condemned to meet their end with a sliver of dignity. But dignity was a luxury most were not afforded. For lesser crimes, or for criminals of a lower class, there was the rope. Hanging was a different kind of performance. It was a slow, degrading dance of death, the body twitching and struggling at the end of the rope, a spectacle of shame. It wasn't about precision. It was about public humiliation. The body would often be left dangling for days, a rotting scarecrow warning away other sinners. Schmidt mastered this too, understanding the mechanics of the drop, the placement of the knot, ensuring death came as the law required. He was a craftsman, and the materials of his trade were rope, steel, and human life. But for crimes that society deemed not just illegal, but truly monstrous, there were punishments designed to obliterate the offender, to unmake them as human beings before they died. For the serial murderer, the traitor who betrayed his city, the blasphemer who spat in the face of God, there was the breaking wheel. Imagine the scene. A man is lashed to a large wooden wheel on the scaffold. Frantz Schmidt stands beside him, not with a sword, but with a heavy iron bar. He is not aiming for the head or the heart. He is aiming for the limbs. The execution begins with the shattering of the shins. The sound of bone snapping, a sharp crack like a piece of dry timber echoes across the silent square. Then the femurs. Then the arms, the elbows, the shoulders. Each blow is deliberate, methodical. The goal is not to kill, but to break the body into a grotesque, boneless ruin while keeping the victim conscious, screaming for as long as possible. Only after this systematic destruction, after the man has been reduced to a pulp of flesh and splintered bone, would Schmidt deliver the grace blow, a strike to the chest or throat to finally end the suffering. The broken body would then be woven into the spokes of the wheel and hoisted high on a pole, a mangled effigy for all to see. This wasn't just punishment. It was a cleansing, a violent exorcism of an evil that was seen as a contamination to the entire community. And Frantz Schmidt, the untouchable, was the one tasked with performing this terrible purification. his calm demeanor a chilling counterpoint to the horror he was inflicting. He moved through these rituals with the focus of an artist, a butcher who believed he was serving God and the state, one broken body at a time. What does a man like that think about when he closes his eyes at night? After the crowds have dispersed, after the mangled body has been taken down from the wheel, after he has cleaned his iron bar and returned it to its place, does the silence of his home ring with the echoes of the screams? This is the question that haunts the story of Frantz Schmidt. He was not a sadist who reveled in pain. His own diary, the most intimate glimpse we have into his mind, is shockingly devoid of emotion. It is a ledger of death, a bureaucratic accounting of souls. An entry might read, Georg Karl, a cutpurse, hanged, or Hans Weber for murder. Broken on the wheel. There's no pride, no remorse, no feeling at all. Just the cold, hard facts. This detachment was his armor, the psychological shield that allowed him to perform acts of unimaginable brutality and then go home to his family. He had to compartmentalize his life, building a wall in his mind between the man who held his children and the man who shattered the bones of other men's children. He had to believe with every fiber of his being that the man on the scaffold was not him. That was the executioner, a separate entity, a tool of the state. He was just Frantz, the husband, the father. But that wall, no matter how thick, must have been stained with blood. The punishments he delivered were not uniform. They were a dark mirror reflecting society's deepest anxieties, and those anxieties were profoundly gendered. The violence of the sword and the wheel was a spectacle of masculine power, a response to crimes of aggression and rebellion. But for women, justice was often quieter, more symbolic, and steeped in a different kind of horror. Consider the case of a young servant girl, desperate and alone, who gives birth in secret and, in a moment of panic and shame, ends her infant's life. Infanticide was a crime that terrified the patriarchal order, an act seen as a violation of the very nature of womanhood. For this, the punishment was not the blade or the fire, it was the sack. Can you imagine the scene? It doesn't happen in the sunlit chaos of the main square. It happens at the riverbank, often at dawn or dusk. The condemned woman is not given the dignity of a final walk. She's sewn into a coarse leather sack, sometimes with a live rooster or a dog, creatures symbolizing other forms of base treachery. She is, in effect, being buried alive in a portable tomb. Frantz Schmidt would have overseen this ritual, his men carrying the heavy, squirming sack to the edge of a bridge or the side of a boat. There is no speech, no final prayer heard by the public, just the grim business of the law. The sack is thrown into the cold, dark water. It vanishes beneath the surface. There are bubbles, a frantic, muffled struggle from within, and then silence. The water, they believed, would cleanse the community of a sin so unnatural it could not be borne in the light of day. For Schmidt, it was another entry in his book, another life extinguished according to the letter of the law. He drowned them as the code demanded, his face as impassive as the surface of the river. Then there were the crimes that were seen as an attack not on man, but on God. Sorcery, heresy, poisoning, these were not just felonies, they were a spiritual cancer. And for such a disease, there was only one cure, fire. A burning at the stake was the ultimate act of public purgation. The condemned, usually a woman accused of witchcraft or a man who dared to preach a forbidden doctrine, would be tied to a thick wooden post in the center of the square. The pyre was built up around them, not with simple logs, but with bundles of wood and pitch-soaked straw designed to burn hot and slow. Frantz Schmidt would not light the fire himself. That was often the job of a subordinate. His role was to oversee the proceedings, to ensure the condemned did not escape, to stand as the silent official witness. As the flames licked upwards, the smell of burning pitch would fill the air, followed by a smell far more sickening. The crowd would watch in a kind of horrified trance. This was not a swift death. It was a slow, agonizing erasure, the body blackened, consumed, and reduced to ash. The belief was that the flames not only destroyed the physical body, but also purified the immortal soul, preventing the contagion of their evil from spreading. For Schmidt, standing amidst the heat and the stench, this must have been the closest he ever came to witnessing hell on earth. Yet his diary entries remain chillingly brief. Anna Pi Hellstein, for sorcery and murder by poison. Burned alive. A sentence, a fact, a job completed. Through all of this, a strange and unexpected part of his duty emerged. The executioner, the man most feared in the entire city, was often the last person a condemned soul would have a meaningful conversation with. On the long walk from the prison cell to the scaffold, a journey known as the heavy walk, Schmidt would walk alongside the prisoner. This was a legal requirement, but it became something more. In these final moments, with death just minutes away, social barriers crumbled. He was no longer just the untouchable executioner. He was the last human being who would treat them as a person. Ancient court records and his own diary suggest that he was a man of few but solemn words. He would offer the condemned a final drink of wine or beer, a small act of mercy known as the St. John's blessing. He would listen to their final confessions, their messages for their families, their pleas of innocence, or their expressions of remorse. He became a reluctant confessor, a repository for the last words of dying men and women. In that liminal space between life and death, He was not the monster they had been taught to fear. He was a guide, a solemn usher into the next world. He looked them in the eye, he spoke to them, and then, with an unwavering hand, he killed them. This was the central, horrifying paradox of his life. To show a flicker of humanity and then to perform the ultimate act of inhumanity over and over again. Decades passed. The young man of 19, his hands trembling on the hilt of his first sword, had become a master of his craft, a middle-aged man whose name was known and feared across Franconia. He had moved from Bamberg to the great imperial city of Nuremberg, a bustling hub of commerce and law. Here, his reputation solidified. He was no longer just an executioner. He was the executioner, the most sought-after professional in his grim field. City councils from across the region would write to Nuremberg, requesting his services for their most high-profile cases. They paid him well, recording his fees in their ledgers with the same bureaucratic dryness as they would for a stonemason or clerk. For the sentence carried out on, the records would state, followed by a sum of guilders. Behind this mundane accounting was a man who had become an institution. He was a symbol of Nuremberg's power, its unyielding commitment to law and order. But the respect he earned was a cold, formal respect. It was the respect one gives to a tamed wolf. He was useful, even necessary, but he was never one of them. The stigma, the stain of his office, remained. His children, born in Nuremberg, would face the same invisible walls that he had. They would be barred from the guilds, shunned in the marketplace, their futures circumscribed by their father's bloody work. And so, as he entered the final years of his career, a profound change began to take root in Frantz Schmidt's life. It was a transformation so unlikely, so contrary to his public identity, that it borders on the unbelievable. He began to heal. This new calling didn't emerge from a sudden crisis of conscience or a rejection of his past. It grew organically from the very knowledge that had made him such an effective killer. For nearly half a century, he had studied the human body with an intimacy that few physicians could claim. He knew its breaking points, its vulnerabilities, its intricate architecture of bone and sinew. He had seen firsthand the effects of trauma, the way a body responds to a blade, a rope, a fire. This dark anatomy, learned in the service of death, now became his tool for preserving life. He started small, treating the injuries of his own family and perhaps a few brave neighbors who were desperate enough to seek help from the town executioner. He would set broken bones, stitch wounds, and prepare herbal remedies passed down through generations. Word began to spread through the poorer quarters of Nuremberg. Whispers of the executioner's surprising skill. People who could not afford a licensed physician, or those who had been given up on, began to appear at his door. Imagine the courage it took for those first patients to cross his threshold, to willingly place their life in the hands of the man whose public function was to take it. But pain and desperation are powerful motivators. They came to him with mangled limbs from workshop accidents, with festering sores, with the fevers that swept through the city's crowded alleys. And he, in turn, treated them. In his diary, where he had once recorded the names of those he killed, he now began to record the names of those he saved. He noted their ailments, the treatments he administered, and their recovery. The same detached, clinical tone is there, but the subject is radically different. Treated Hans Greiner for a severe leg wound. Administered a poultice to Frau Ziegler's infected hand. The ledger of death was slowly, painstakingly being balanced by a ledger of healing. This was not a secret. The city authorities were well aware of Schmidt's parallel practice. In fact, they unofficially sanctioned it. The executioner's knowledge of the human body was a recognized, if unsettling, fact. In some parts of the empire, executioners were even legally permitted to act as healers, occupying a strange gray area between medicine and magic. This duality was the ultimate expression of his life's paradox. By day, he might be called upon to question a prisoner, a process that often involved the application of judicial torture. He would be the one operating the thumbscrews or the rack, his expert knowledge of anatomy allowing him to inflict maximum pain without accidentally killing the subject before a confession could be extracted. He would listen to the man's screams, record his pleas, and then, that very evening, he might return home to gently set the broken arm of a child who had fallen from a tree. He was both the cause of suffering and the alleviator of it. He was the state's instrument of pain and its last resort healer. He walked a tightrope between two worlds, a figure of absolute terror and a source of quiet hope. This period of his life forces us to confront a deeply uncomfortable question. Can a man who has caused so much death truly be a force for good? Can the hands that have taken hundreds of lives ever be truly clean, even if they are now working to save them? For the people of Nuremberg, the answer was a pragmatic one. They still feared the executioner, but they came to respect the healer. He was no longer just a symbol of death. He was becoming something more complex, something the rigid social structure of his time had no name for. He was a man who had been born into a prison of dishonor, and he was now, in the twilight of his life, forging a key to his own liberation, not with a sword, but with a salve. In the year 1617, after a career spanning 4 decades, Frantz Schmidt laid down his sword for the last time. He was an old man now, his hair gray, his body stooped from the years of wielding the heavy blade. He had executed his 394th and final condemned soul. He formally petitioned the Nuremberg City Council for his retirement. The request was granted. For the first time since he was a boy, he was no longer the executioner. He was simply Frantz Schmidt. But the specter of his profession, the stain of dishonor still clung to him and, more importantly, to his children. His life's work was done, but his ultimate ambition, the one that had smoldered within him since his youth, remained unfulfilled. He didn't just want to be allowed to heal. He wanted to be honorable. He wanted to wash the blood of his inherited trade from his family's name forever. He wanted his sons to be able to join guilds, to marry well, to walk through the city square not as the children of a pariah, but as respected citizens. He wanted to break the curse. This was a dream that no executioner in the memory of the Holy Roman Empire had ever dared to entertain. It was an impossible ambition, an attempt to overturn a social order that had been in place for centuries. He dedicated his retirement entirely to his medical practice. His reputation as a healer, which had grown steadily over the years, now blossomed. He was no longer a shadowy figure practicing in the margins. He was a full-time physician to the city's common folk. His house, once a place people hurried past with averted eyes, became a place of sanctuary. He treated hundreds, perhaps thousands of patients. He documented their cases with the same meticulous care he had once used to document their deaths. This transformation was not just a personal quest. It was a public spectacle. The people of Nuremberg witnessed it firsthand. The man they had once watched on the scaffold, the embodiment of state-sanctioned death, was now the man who saved their children from fever, who healed their wounds, who offered comfort in their sickness. He was systematically, patient by patient, rewriting his own legacy in the minds of the populace. He was using the second half of his life to atone for the first, not through prayer or penitence, but through active, tangible good works. He was demonstrating, through his actions, that a man is more than the worst thing he is forced to do, but public opinion was not enough. To truly break the curse, he needed more than the gratitude of his patients. He needed an official act, a decree from the highest power in the land that could legally erase the stain of his former life. And so, he embarked on his most audacious act yet. He petitioned the Holy Roman Emperor himself, Ferdinand II. Imagine the audacity of this. A retired executioner, a man from the most despised social class, writing a letter to the most powerful ruler in Christendom, asking to be declared honorable. It was the equivalent of a garbage collector asking for a knighthood. He would have compiled evidence of his long and flawless service to the state, of his pious and upright personal life, and, crucially, of his extensive work as a healer. He was making an argument that his unwavering devotion to the law, even in its most brutal form, combined with his subsequent dedication to preserving life, had earned him the right to be seen as a whole man, not just a tainted functionary. He was asking the emperor to look past the blood and see the man. In the year 1624, the impossible happened. Emperor Ferdinand II, from his distant court in Vienna, issued a formal imperial decree. It was a document that would have sent shockwaves through the rigid social hierarchy of the empire. For the first time in memory, an executioner and his family were officially declared ehrlich, honorable. The decree was a legal restoration of his family's name. It explicitly stated that the stain of his profession was lifted, that he and his descendants were to be considered the social and legal equals of any other citizen. With the stroke of a pen, the emperor had validated Frantz Schmidt's entire life. He had recognized that Schmidt had not chosen his path, but had walked it with a grim duty and precision that served the state. And he had recognized that his work as a healer was a genuine act of redemption. The curse was broken. The cage was unlocked. Frantz Schmidt, the son of a woodsman forced into a life of blood, had done what no one thought possible. He had made his family's name clean again. Frantz Schmidt died in 1634, a decade after his imperial pardon. He was not buried in the isolated, unconsecrated ground reserved for the dishonorable. He was laid to rest in a prominent Nuremberg cemetery, St. Rochus, under a gravestone that can still be seen today. The stone bears no sword, no wheel, no symbol of his dark trade. It bears the Schmidt family crest, a symbol of honor, and an epitaph that speaks not of vengeance, but of a life fully and paradoxically lived. His story forces us to grapple with a profound and unsettling question. Can a life defined by state-sanctioned killing ever truly achieve honor? Was Frantz Schmidt a monster with a healer's hands, or a good man forced to perform monstrous deeds? His life suggests that the answer is never simple. He remains a chilling testament to the brutal justice of a bygone era, but also an enduring symbol of a man's relentless, lifelong quest to redeem a name he never chose to stain. His legacy is not written in blood, but in the deep and complex shades of gray that define the human condition itself.